usually happens in a way that feels wrong. A baby is crying, loud, intense, unstoppable. You try everything. You hold them, you speak softly, you stay close, nothing works. Then you do something simple. You step out of the room, and suddenly, they stop. Not gradually, not slowly, instantly. The crying disappears like it was never there. And for most people, that feels confusing, even personal, like your absence fixed what your presence couldn't. So what just happened? Did the baby prefer you leaving? Did they get distracted? Did they forget? None of those explanations fully hold because the timing is too precise, too immediate, too consistent across different situations. And once you notice it happening more than once, it stops feeling random. It starts feeling like a pattern. So the real question becomes, why does the absence of a caregiver sometimes create more calm than their presence? And the answer starts somewhere unexpected. Most people assume a baby cries because something is missing: comfort, food, attention, safety. So the solution seems obvious: stay closer, increase contact, increase reassurance. But sometimes that doesn't reduce the crying, it intensifies it. And that's where the assumption breaks. Because presence is not always neutral. To a developing nervous system, presence is input, constant input. Facial expression, eye contact, movement, breathing, emotional state, distance changes, micro adjustments in posture. All of it is being processed at once. And when the system is already overwhelmed, adding more input doesn't help. It can push it further past its limit. So the caregiver's presence, even with good intention, can become too much information at once. Not emotionally, physiologically. Now here's the key shift. When you leave the room, the input stream suddenly drops. No face, no motion, no emotional signal variability, no unpredictable interaction cues. Just silence, stillness, reduced stimulation. And for a nervous system that was overloaded, that reduction can feel like relief. Not because the caregiver was bad, but because the system needed fewer signals to process. Fewer variables, fewer changes, fewer demands on attention. And in that reduction, the system can begin to reorganize itself. But this still doesn't fully explain the immediate stop. Because reduction alone is gradual, not instant. So something else must be happening at the same time. And to understand that, we need to look at what the baby is actually tracking during interaction. Because it's not just presence, it's responsiveness. And that's where things start to shift again. There's a subtle detail most people miss when a baby is crying. They are not just expressing distress, they are testing something. Not consciously, not logically, but through behavior. Crying, pausing, looking, waiting, escalating again. It is a loop, a feedback loop. And the most important part of that loop is not the crying itself. It is what happens after it. Does someone respond? Does the face change? Does the tone shift? Does the environment adjust? Because for the infant nervous system, response is not comfort. Response is stability confirmation. So when a caregiver is present, but emotionally inconsistent or overstimulating or unpredictable in microsignals, the system keeps trying, keeps checking, keeps escalating, because it has not yet found a stable answer. Now here's where the absence becomes interesting. When the caregiver leaves the room, something changes immediately. The feedback loop stops. There is no more checking, no more partial responses, no more unstable signals. Just silence, just absence, just a break in the system. And in that break, the nervous system is no longer being challenged to interpret mixed information. And that matters more than it sounds, because for a developing brain, uncertainty is effort, continuous effort. So when uncertainty suddenly disappears, the system can downshift. Not because the problem is solved, but because the input has stopped arriving. And in that moment, the body can begin to regulate itself again. This is where the crying stops, not as a decision, not as understanding, but as withdrawal of stimulation. But there's still a missing piece. Because babies don't only react to noise or presence, they react to expectation of return. And that expectation changes everything. Because absence is not always interpreted as absence. Sometimes it is interpreted as a state shift, a system change, a new environmental rule. And in the next part, we're going to explore why the baby may calm down, not because you left, but because the predictable pattern of interaction has been temporarily resolved. There's something subtle happening during crying that most people never notice. The baby is not only reacting to what is present, they are reacting to what they believe will continue to happen. Because in early development, interaction is rarely experienced as separate moments. It is experienced as a continuous loop. Approach, response, adjustment, response again, over and over. And within that loop, the most important variable is not the caregiver. It is return of signal. Will the face respond again? Will the voice come back? Will the interaction stabilize? So when the caregiver is present but inconsistent, the system stays active, waiting, testing, escalating, because the pattern has not resolved. But when the caregiver leaves the room, something unexpected happens inside the system. The loop breaks. There is no more incoming signal, no more partial responses, no more uncertainty about timing. And without incoming data, the nervous system stops predicting in real time. It shifts from active monitoring to passive state. Not calm in the emotional sense, but reduced processing demand. And that reduction matters, because a large part of infant distress is not just emotion, it is ongoing prediction effort. Trying to interpret what will happen next, when it will happen, how it will happen, whether it will change. That constant forecasting requires energy, attention, physiological activation. So when the system no longer receives input, it no longer needs to forecast. And in that moment, activation can drop, which is why crying can stop so abruptly. Not because the baby understood anything, but because the system stopped being required to compute interaction. Now here's where it becomes more interesting. Because this calm is not necessarily about comfort. It is about resolution of uncertainty through interruption. The pattern is no longer incomplete. It is no longer actively unfolding. It is simply paused. And the nervous system treats that pause differently than ongoing instability. But there is still another layer underneath this. Because even when a caregiver leaves the room, the system does not fully reset. It retains expectation, memory of presence, prediction of return, and that changes how the next interaction will begin, which leads to a deeper question. Is the baby calming because you left, or because the predictive loop finally found a temporary boundary? And in the next part, we are going to explore what happens when the caregiver returns, and why that moment can sometimes restart everything instantly. There's a moment that reveals the real structure of this whole system. It's not when you leave, it's when you come back. Because the baby has already changed state, the crying has stopped, the system has dropped its intensity, there is stillness, a kind of reset. And then you re-enter the room, and everything starts again. Sometimes instantly, sometimes even faster than before. The crying returns, the distress reappears, the system spikes, and from the outside, it feels contradictory. If leaving calmed them, why does returning bring it back? The answer is not about preference. It's not about attachment in a simple sense. It's about reactivation of prediction. Because when you left, the system stopped receiving updates. The loop paused. Uncertainty was temporarily removed. But when you return, the loop starts again, immediately. And now the system has to reprocess everything. Are you stable again? Are you staying? Is the pattern continuing? What is the new rule? And this re-entry is not neutral, because your return is not just presence. It is a sudden return of complex signal input. Movement, face, emotion, expectation, timing, all reactivated at once. And for a system that just dropped into low stimulation, that sudden increase can be overwhelming. So the reaction is not rejection. It is recalibration under load. The system is trying to reestablish meaning in real time. But there is something even more important happening underneath this. Because the baby is not reacting to you as a person. They are reacting to the restarting of a prediction cycle. A cycle that now has to be rebuilt from scratch, even if nothing bad happened. And this is where the illusion becomes strongest, because it looks like emotional inconsistency. But it is actually system instability. The brain is not storing "you left and I was fine," or "you came back and I cried." It is storing patterns like presence, unpredictable change, absence, reduced input, return equals sudden system restart. And those patterns shape future responses. Over time, the system becomes more sensitive to transitions, less tolerant of unpredictability, more reactive to sudden shifts. Now here's the key insight. The baby is not responding to single moments. They are responding to transitions between states. Presence, absence, return. Each shift forces recalibration. Each recalibration requires energy. Each energy demand becomes visible as emotion. So the crying is not random. It is the visible surface of system reconfiguration. But even this is still not the deepest layer, because we have not yet asked the most important question. Why does the nervous system rely so heavily on presence and absence in the first place? And in the final part, we are going to bring everything together and uncover the core mechanism underneath it all. Why early human regulation is built entirely on shared systems rather than individual stability. By this point, the pattern is no longer about crying or calming or presence versus absence. It is something deeper. It is dependence on shared regulation. Because in the earliest stage of human life, the brain is not built to stabilize itself alone. It is built to stabilize through other systems, through interaction, through co-regulation, through predictable return. Which means everything we saw, crying before touch, calming when you leave, restarting when you return, is not contradiction, it is design. A system built to survive before self-regulation exists. So when the caregiver is present, the baby is not just receiving care. They are integrating a regulatory system that is not yet built inside them. And when that system becomes too unstable, the body escalates, not as failure, but as protection. And when the input disappears, the system temporarily reduces load, not as understanding, but as relief from processing demand. And when the input returns, the system restarts calibration again, because that is what it is designed to do. So none of it is random, none of it is irrational, none of it is emotional confusion. It is a developing nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do, stabilize through external regulation before internal regulation exists. And that changes the meaning of everything. Because the baby is not reacting to you as a person in isolated moments. They are interacting with you as a regulatory environment that appears and disappears in time. And their entire nervous system is learning one fundamental rule: how stability enters the body through relationship. So the next time it happens, that sudden crying, that sudden silence, that sudden shift when you leave or return, it is not about control. It is not about behavior. It is not even about emotion in the adult sense. It is about a system learning how to exist in a world where safety is not internal yet, but shared. And slowly, through thousands of these micro-transitions, that shared system becomes internalized. Until one day, they no longer need to borrow your nervous system, because they have built their own. But in the beginning, you are the structure, the reference, the temporary stability. And that is why it all feels so sensitive, so immediate, so strangely precise. Because at that stage of life, presence is not just presence, absence is not just absence, return is not just return. They are signals that shape the architecture of a human mind. And that is the part most people never see, because what looks like a baby crying for no reason is actually a system learning how to survive in a world that only makes sense through other people.